The UN, I just mentioned that the recent vote, the resolution on aggression against Ukraine, the vote was 141 for, 35 abstentions, and only 5 against. And now I want to come, thank you very much, and we're going to come to Dr. Kantathi Supamongkol. It's really a pleasure, and thank you for your patience waiting for your turn. It's really a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Kantathi again after some time when he was last here on stage with us. I've known him for the past 3 decades, and back then he was a diplomat for 10 years at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, and he rose up to be the director of policy and planning. And then he left for a political career. Of course, he eventually became, after elections and so on, became Thailand's last foreign minister before the first of the 2 coups in the 21st century. So that was 2005, 2006. Since then, Dr. Kantathi has been the visiting professor at UCLA, where he received his undergraduate education. He received his MA at the American University and PhD at the University of Southern California, USC. He has taught international law, international humanitarian law, and his very long, illustrious background. But I'll just say this. If you ever go to Sukhumvit 26, in that area, that's his family enterprise business. He's also the head of the Kantathi Enterprise International that develops property in that whole area. Dr. Kantathi, we heard about New Zealand being a small country that can punch above the weight by standing up for the international system, the rules-based international system, which is kind of an international public good because it benefits everyone, right? I'm going to come to you for Thailand's position, but on top of it, maybe you can tell us a little bit about, Dr. Kantathi actually has met President Putin back in his time as foreign minister, and also Foreign Minister Lavrov. So maybe a little bit about, we had this discussion a little bit earlier, and you made this point, I think, has Putin gone too far here? I mean, he could have maybe already got away with Crimea. Maybe Donbass, but then invasion of Ukraine. This is a whole full-scale war, and it stirs up the whole world, And then your personal experience, perhaps, what do you make of these leaders in your time? Your personal encounter, and then finally, if you can just touch on the Thai. Our leader said we're going to be neutral, which reminds me, by the way, back in the Iraq War, the initial impulse of the then Prime Minister Thaksin was that we're going to be neutral. But then, of course, he was reminded we're a U.S. treaty ally, and then Thailand quickly joined the war effort. So our leaders now say neutral, but then we voted in the UN for the resolution aggression against Ukraine. Dr. Kantathi.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Thitinan. It has indeed been a long time since we started working together in different areas, and we became close friends throughout these years. And I'm so pleased that I came back. I actually am now based in Los Angeles, and I came back just a few days ago, did my one-night quarantine, and was invited to come here, and I appreciate the invitation. And I would like to share with you, of course, some of my personal perspective, as well as the broader picture of the situation. So you mentioned that I have met with President Putin. I have met him on 2 occasions. We had an official visit to Russia, and we were invited to have dinner with him at the official residence way outside of Moscow. I looked into his eyes, and I wasn't sure if I saw his soul or not. But what I got back from these different meetings was that first, he was a calculating man. And the second one was, of course, the word that came to mind. He had the potential to be ruthless. He had a strange, kind of a different sense of humor. We talk about British sense of humor, but I recall that our Prime Minister was surprised when Putin said at the end of the dinner that he would personally take us back to the airport, which was quite a long way away from his residence. And the Thai Prime Minister was then invited to the car. And we diplomats know the fact that in our protocol, different seats in the car had different ranks. So, and my Prime Minister was educated of that, was given that information. And, but to his surprise, the assistant took him straight to the car and pointed towards the front seat next to the driver. And my Prime Minister then said, well, you know, I thought it was a mistake. Is this, and then he asked the assistant again, are you sure front seat? And the assistant says, yes, this is your seat, Prime Minister. And he said, well, he was boiling inside. My Prime Minister then had some emotions, but he thought he was in Russia. He was with Putin, and he had to behave. So he didn't want to show his temper inside. And so he grudgingly sat sat on that seat. And then he thought, well, look, I might as well be polite to the driver, since I'm going to be sitting with him for a while. So he turned to the driver, and it was Putin. And so he was relieved, because at least that was not an insult. And Putin turned to him and said, well, if you trust me, don't wear your seatbelt. That was his sense of humor, I believe. The other one that was quite interesting was when we met him again in Malaysia. There was an ASEAN meeting with Russia involved, and we all had to get dressed in the local attires. And we were actually scheduled, I was scheduled to sign a treaty between Thailand and Russia with Lavrov. And Putin and our Prime Minister were actually going to witness that. Well, it was scheduled for 10:30 at night, which was late, but nevertheless, the dinner went quite long. The dinner went until 11. This was the ASEAN dinner. And so we said to the Russians, let's rush to the to sign the treaty, and then let's go to bed. And Putin sent us a message saying that he would not be seen signing or witnessing the signing without a suit on. So he insisted on going back to his room, different hotel, and we signed the treaty at 1:30 in the morning. Just because of that, he said Russian television would not look kindly at him if he had a Malaysian shirt on. We did ask him to support our candidate for the UN Secretary General, and his answer was quite interesting. He said something which made our candidate quite happy, but I listened to what he said, and there was no content, there was no commitment, but it was a feel-good answer. So what he did was he looked at our candidate in the eye for a minute, and then he said, "You already look like a UN Secretary General." That's all he said. Very, very happy for the candidate, but Russia did not support Thailand, and I knew that there was lack of content. So I agree with all previous speakers that the violation of the territory of Ukraine, the use of force against another country, is a serious violation of international law. However, I think there is another aspect of that violation which was even worse for me, and that was the targeting and the killing of innocent people, civilians, kids, the hospital just less than 24 hours ago. I did not expect that. It's a war crime for sure, but it's multiple actions which all were eligible for war crime trials. However, the problem with the present international system is that we do have the International Criminal Court, but the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court is still a problem because, first of all, the court would have jurisdiction if the country involved was part of the Rome Statute, and the Ukraine as well as Russia are not. So there's no basis for the jurisdiction of the ICC. But in addition to that, the court does provide the possibility that jurisdiction could be obtained if the United Nations Security Council recommends. And we know that the United Nations Security Council will definitely not recommend because of the veto ability of a permanent member of the Security Council. So that's a big question mark. Crimes for sure, serious war crimes. But how are we going to bring a sitting president of a permanent member of the Security Council to court? That seems an impossible task at this time. Of course, maybe some other courts can be created with different jurisdictions. The vote in the UN, I remembered very well the Uniting for Peace resolutions back in the 50s allowed for the first time when, well, that was actually a situation with regarding Korea. So the Soviet Union then was ready to block the formation of UN forces in Korea, but what happened then was suddenly the Soviet delegation decided to boycott the Security Council, and the boycott was because they were protesting against the inability of Beijing to become a member. Taipei was a member then. And so they missed the vote a couple of times. And because they missed the votes in the Security Council, the Security Council was able to create the UN forces in Korea when they realized that they never miss another meeting of the Security Council. And then they started to veto subsequent draft resolutions, which led to the Uniting for Peace resolution, allowing the General Assembly to take action instead, but not binding, but at least it reflects the will of the international community. And I was pleased that Thailand was able to give the yes vote. And there's no other choice. We have the violation of international law as well as criminal war crimes being committed at this point. Now, I was in the U.S. when things started to develop, and I was a bit puzzled by one thing. I agreed with what President Biden had done. I agreed with what the EU had done. But one thing puzzled me, and that was, even though we all know that Ukraine is not part of NATO, and therefore Article 5 could not be triggered. However, the use of force, of course, in general terms, can still take place for other reasons than Article 5. But I agree with the fact that Article 5 would not be triggered, of course, and also agreed that the use of force against Russia would be devastating. But what confused me was, why did President Biden open that card prematurely at the offset to say to the world and to Russia that we will not use force against Russia. We will use only economic sanctions. I thought to myself, why open this card? Because obviously he had to do the risk calculation. And the message there was that, okay, the biggest risk of the US and NATO using force against his aggression is gone. And it's gone until Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, which then gives, it seems, an incentive psychologically to say, oh, well, let's do it now. Because if we wait and suddenly Ukraine becomes a member of NATO, then it would trigger that. So it seems like it's sending an unintended message to say that we will definitely not use force. Now, even though we're not going to use force against, NATO and the US would not use force against Russia for Ukraine, but why reveal that? Why not make it something that he had to put into his calculation? That was the question that I had in my mind, and I could not really resolve that because I thought, I still think that if that was not clearly stated, maybe he would come to a different conclusion. It's similar to the Chinese situation here. Taiwan is definitely not a treaty ally of the US, but the Chinese, I'm sure, feel that if a Chinese invasion of Taiwan takes place, the US may respond with a military action, and that is a big deterrent. So that was a bit of a question mark. The miscalculation that I saw, beyond that was the fact that the military buildup seemed to have been quite successful. It was scary. U.S. intelligence and British intelligence were saying that they would be ready to invade if they wished. It was at that point. It reminded me of 2003 when the U.S. built up sufficient forces against Iraq. And I thought that was a success because Saddam Hussein was ready to open up his country for inspection at the height of the buildup. And then this decision to invade happened, and then the picture became very different. And it was not a victory that the U.S. had wanted. And this was something that was in a way similar. The French president went and sat across Putin, long table, and came back to say that, you know, let's implement the Minsk agreement, the Minsk Accords. The Minsk Accord would have enabled the two, more or less, separatist Donbass states to be to have some autonomy. But in addition to that, to have possibly a veto power against the Ukraine joining NATO. And it was not likely that Ukraine would be accepted into NATO anyway in the foreseeable future. So the build-up, more or less, the Russian build-up, more or less ensured that Ukraine would not be part of NATO. He had a lot of bargaining power then, I thought. You know, President Biden, Macron, they were ready to go and meet him, even virtually, at his call. Everyone was acknowledging the importance of Russia, and that was what he was trying to rebuild, because he felt that Russia was placed on the sideline, and he wanted Russia to go back to be respected again, you know. So it was all there. So I thought to myself, don't invade. You have already won. And then he decided to do that. And I thought that was a major miscalculation. And it seems to me that he thought that Ukrainians would not put up a big fight, similar to how former President Bush thought that Iraq would not put up a big fight. Invasion would have been over. The so-called, quote-unquote, with all due respect, President Zelensky, from the eyes of Putin, was a comedian, a young comedian. He would probably run away, probably. I remember Zelensky giving an interview just before the attack, saying that I've been trying to call Putin, but the phone would not be picked up, you know. Yeah, that was a very bad sign. So he thought it would have been very easy to move in. And maybe 1 day or 2 days, the military would have had a coup, maybe. And he encouraged the coup against Zelensky, and then a different president who would serve Russia would come in, right? Well, that didn't happen. And the other miscalculation is the fact that the Ukrainians were able to fight back in such a powerful way. And then another miscalculation was that the Russians were not able to fight as well as many people, including probably President Putin, expected. So those were the miscalculations and the biting and the powerful aspects of the sanctions have been very successful. Maybe I should leave it here, and then we can continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kantathi. Very rich, and it's great. You know, these days we record our events, and this one we will really record it, because the comments and remarks here will be not only quoted and used in the local and international media, but also we'll use this for class material across the different classes, and what you have done. And I am a little bit envious, I have to say. You know, he began as a diplomat, and then became elected politician, then became foreign minister, and now professor. So, you know, I'm just a run-of-the-mill professor. He really knows his stuff. from the ground and from experience. So the insights you shared, I mean, these are just anecdotes, but they're very insightful about Mr. Putin. And I'll just say, you used the word ruthless, calculating, but the seatbelt anecdote suggests there's a little bit of a recklessness in there. In addition to, this is seems like a man of the unexpected actions, right?
Yes, and I think the man that I saw then is a different man now, because one thing, isolation for 2 years, being so scared of COVID, and surrounding himself with people who probably would just say yes, sir, to whatever he thinks. But one aspect of that is the fact that I think that he is ruthless, he's willing to kill others, but he's not suicidal. And you can say, you can see that clearly. He's afraid of COVID. He's not suicidal. But he did mention a nuclear alert, which is quite interesting, because nuclear alert in Russia has 4 levels. So what he did was he raised it from just the normal maintenance of nuclear weapons to an elevated alert, which actually meant making sure that the communication line is working, making sure that hardwares are in good place, all ready. But there are 2 more steps to that, and the third one is known as the a danger level, and then the 4th one is full alert. So we're at the 2nd level, but I think that it's a bluff more, because he's not suicidal. But the same would probably not apply to chemical weapons and biological weapons. That's a different equation. And although he's not suicidal, there is a fear, though, that if he feels that he is being boxed in and he would die anyway, then I think we're in great danger. So that's a delicate balance that we have to make sure that we don't get to that place. Because in international relations, we always look at, when we analyze and we think, well, COVID, 2 years isolation, maybe he's a bit mad. It could be true that he's a bit mad, but on the other hand, by appearing mad, he makes his threat more credible. So a madman would be able to use nuclear weapons more. So in that sense, appearing to be mad could increase his bargaining power. So I'm not sure. It's a mixture. That's for all the analysts to figure it out. But 2 sides to everything.
Yeah, thank you very much.
If I might